Hello YouTube, it's Lion here with Hobbies Man once again, and today we're going to be looking at another manga. We're going to be doing another first impressions review, and today we're going to be looking at Alice in Borderland Volume 1. This is actually a 2-in-1 edition. It covers the first 2 volumes of Alice in Borderland, which means that we were going to have 9 of these total to have, all 18 volumes. I think that's how it works. And yeah, so this is written by Haruo Aso, who is the guy that did Psalm 100. And I never got into that. It sounded interesting, but then the more I saw videos about it, the more I realized that one, zombies really aren't my thing, so I was already not going to like the story. But two, that the story kind of devolves into this kind of very, just boring kind of story that I wasn't going to be interested in. But this sounded cool in premise, so I definitely wanted to check it out, so I bought it. It's published by Viz, as you guys can see right there. It's under the signature line, but nothing about this is particularly special. This is the most basic signature line book I've ever seen. And the demographic is shonen, which is pretty good. I mean, I thought it was a seinen, but apparently it's a shonen. It doesn't really matter. Again, the demographics are mostly just based on what magazine publishes the story. It doesn't really tell you what the content's going to be, although it supposedly should, but it's very unclear sometimes. And the genres here are supposed to be death game, suspense, and supernatural horror, and it definitely has all of these elements. So I can definitely vouch for the fact that these are the genres. And in terms of adaptation, this has a live action show. I think it came out right at the end of Squid Game's popularity, and so it kind of managed to connect into that popularity, and then a lot of people picked it up, and then Viz was like, oh, we should probably publish this. And I think that's how it went. I'm not exactly sure. Most of the time, I'm pretty sure that companies know ahead of time what's going to be going on, so they make purchases based on that. I'm not exactly sure. That's not really what the point of this video is about, so, let's not talk about it. Let's talk about the edition itself, because I'm pretty disappointed for the price point. A $20 Viz signature book, in my eyes, should be equivalent to the Naoki Urasawa Monster Collector editions, right? It should have French flaps, it should have a nice heft to it, and it should have at least a color page. This has none of that. This is a very light feeling book, which is actually not horrible. I'm on two minds of this, right? On one hand, it's very nice that it's light and easy to read because your wrist doesn't hurt when you're trying to hold it open, because this is kind of a big book. If it was hefty, it would probably not be very comfortable to read. However, in terms of it being a signature release and being special and meaningful, it does not have that, because it doesn't feel weighty. It doesn't have a nice heft to it. And I think that heft is one of the ways that you can kind of easily find or feel that something is nice. The difference between the Dark Horse deluxe editions is that they weigh a shit ton, right? Compared to a Vinland Saga book, which is supposed to be a very nice edition, basically weighs nothing. And so the deluxe edition feels way nicer. Of course, it is way nicer, but it also feels way nicer because it is heavy, right? But at the same time, it comes with the drawback that it's harder to read because, they're gigantic. So there you go. That's kind of me illustrating that issue. The other issue is there's no French flaps, which is, it's not that big of a deal, but it makes it feel nicer. And there's no colored pages at all. These are all very basic black pages. And this paper isn't bad per se. It's pretty standard. It doesn't really, have any ghosting or anything. But the ink doesn't seem to want to stay stuck to it. And while I was reading this, I ended up with black and gray fingers. Like the tips of my fingertips on both hands were kind of gray, and particularly my thumb was kind of black from, trying to change the page and kind of moving my fingers across the page as I was reading. And it's pretty annoying because I don't want to have to wash my hands after reading a book, right? It's kind of weird to have to do that. But it isn't really that big of an issue. The biggest issue I had with his manga specifically is that it cost $20. It didn't have any of the nice signature line, supposedly, meaningful, fancy stuff to it. But it also had pages where the ink was not clear. It wasn't printed well. It was mostly gray instead of clear black. And specifically, it's not so bad in the drawings. It doesn't bother me that much. But I was trying to read some bubbles, some thought bubbles, some speech bubbles, and I couldn't, or it was kind of difficult to do so because so many of these little bubbles had, kind of all of the ink rubbed off them, and it's kind of annoying. Let me see if I can find one. I mean, it's not that many, and it really isn't that big of a deal. At the end of the day, it's still readable. I can still enjoy the story. It's just one of those things where it's like, I paid a bunch of money for this. I shouldn't have to, deal with these kind of annoyances while I'm reading something that I paid $20 for. Like I said, it's not that big of a deal. I can still read the book, but it's one of those like annoyances because I was, expecting a certain level of quality that Viz just didn't deliver on, which sucks because Viz is usually pretty good about their quality control, at least on their first printings. And given that I bought this a week after it came out, it really shouldn't have any issues, right? So that's it for that. I can't find any quickly, so I'm just gonna show you one I took a picture of right there. It's on my Twitter. And now let's actually talk about the premise here. So it follows these 3 high school guys, or 2 of them are in high school and the other one dropped out, but he runs a bar, but he's their age and they're friends. And they're basically just dealing with their life. They're in that kind of moment of like nihilistic and kind of like angsty moments in their young lives. They're almost done with school, but they don't really want to have to deal with adulthood just yet. And they kind of hate everything around them. And suddenly they're flung into the future as far as I understand it. And now they have to deal with this game, with this death game scenario that they find themselves in. And it kind of invigorates a pair of them. And the third character kind of loses his will to live. And then they meet up with this female character who happens to join their little group. And they kind of strive through, these different games. We see 2 major games in this story, in this volume. We see the first one, which is a thought process game, and the other one, which is basically like lethal tag. And it's pretty interesting. I quite like it. The one thing that kind of didn't make sense to me was that there's this guy, and one of the main characters, his name is Ryohei Arisu, who happens to be kind of like a bum. He's not good at school. However, we clearly see that he's like very, very intelligent. And then I don't understand why he's not good at school. Because, usually school, at least high school, is not really about you being like all that great at school. It's mostly just like, are you quick enough to understand what they're telling you quickly enough? And even if you don't, do that much work, if your work ethic isn't that good, as long as you understand the material, you should be able to, pass class, right? But this guy seems to be struggling with school. And so it doesn't make sense to me that he is characterized as someone that doesn't do well in school, and then also characterized as someone that is hyper intelligent. And it's kind of weird. It doesn't make sense to me. A lot of people are probably going to be like, oh, just because you're not good at school doesn't mean you're not good at everything else. It's like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that he's struggling with high school in a way that doesn't make sense for the intelligence that he portrays later, right? So I think they try to explain this as like he's able to notice things where he's under the threat of death or whatever, which is a really weird kind of way to activate your intelligence. I don't know. It feels like he's a bum, and then suddenly he becomes like L or Light from Death Note when he's in danger, and it's kind of weird. I don't know. I didn't really find that to be all that meaningful, but everything else about the story is actually quite good. I really enjoy the kind of death game scenario. The closest thing to a death game that I've ever read is Hunger Games, and maybe some other dystopian YA novels. So it's cool. It's interesting, but I don't necessarily understand the characterization of the main character, but everything else is quite good. The suspense is nice. The female character is interesting. The dynamic between all 4 characters is quite good. Everything is about it is pretty nice, except for the fact that the inking on the edition is pretty poor. But the art style is pretty interesting, and the story is cool. So there you go. That's it. Mostly this was a kind of angry ramble about the fact that Viz doesn't put any care into their books, which is maybe just me being you know, an uppity kind of customer, but I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought, and thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.